Hello and welcome to Photographic Connections, the podcast where we create connection to self, nature and others through the art of photography. My name is Kim Grant, the founder of Photographic Connections and your host for this podcast. And today I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Gill Moon onto the podcast. Gill is a landscape photographer based in Surrey in the UK. She shares how her fond childhood memories of nature, photography and sailing inspired her to do what she is doing now. She also shares how she loves to bring a feeling of calm into her images and why her local area speaks so deeply to her. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Gill Moon. Hi Gill, it's so lovely to connect with you. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast this week.
Hello, Kim. Nice to be on.
Yes, it's lovely. And I think before we begin delving into your story, I must first thank our lovely listeners, because it's thanks to them that I came across you and was able to invite you on here today. And your name has flagged up on my Instagram a couple of times over the years, but thanks to them, like I say, you're here. And having looked through your website and looking at, I guess, how you approach your photography, I feel we're going to have a really interesting conversation today. So the first thing I always do...
It's really nice to know that people out there are following me. So that's lovely.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. And the first thing I love to do is to ask you to go way back to the beginning of your photography journey and just share the story of what got you into photography in the first place.
Yes, of course. Yes. So I think my journey into photography really started when I was a child. That's when I first was given my first camera when I was about 10. And my parents gave it to me for my birthday, and it was a little point and shoot Kodak camera. And it went everywhere with me, and it was a lovely way to kind of record my holidays and my time growing up, really. And from that point on, I've always owned a camera, but I didn't, sort of in my 20s and 30s, probably didn't use it very much, just kind of like for family stuff, really. And it wasn't until I moved to Suffolk in 2007 that photography really started to become a bit more important in my life. So I moved here from the West Country, from Somerset, and when I came here, I just got divorced, and I decided that I wanted my life to be a bit different. I didn't want to carry on working for like big companies that I was working for, so I wanted to do something different. So I came here, and rather randomly, I bought a 100-year-old Dutch sailing barge. And the idea was that I was going to do this up and run kind of luxury holidays afloat. That was my plan. So I spent just under 2 years doing up this barge, completely gutted it and completely sort of renovated it from scratch. And obviously I had my camera and I documented the sort of whole process. And then when I'd finished, obviously I was going to run a business, so I needed my camera to take photos for a website, for marketing purposes, and to try and encourage people to come to Suffolk and stay on my barge. So that's where the kind of photography sort of really kicked off. So and because it was like holidays afloat, I got into the whole sailing scene on the Suffolk coast. So I started photographing barge matches, classic yacht races, regattas for local sailing clubs, all that kind of stuff. So that was really fun. And I ran my holiday business for about 6 years. And whilst all that was going on, I had a kind of real stressful personal life during a lot of that time. And I began to use photography as a means to escape. So I would take my camera and sometimes take the dog, although those two things didn't always work well together. And I would just go out and I would sort of wander the coast or the river paths, and I'd just go and lose myself in the natural world for a few hours. And that was my way of coping with quite stressful times at home. So, and then in 2016, I sold my barge, sold my business, got rid of all the stress in my life, and I've been doing photography full time since then. So I've kind of that's what I do now. So I run workshops, and that's my business. So that's
Wow.
kind of a potted version of my story.
What an incredible journey you've been on, Gill. And I love how photography has been almost going throughout your life ever since you were 10 years old. I just love that that gift was given to you so early, and then you've kind of used it on and off through different aspects of your life. And what an incredible thing to do, to move and to buy this barge and to get into the sailing scene and start photographing it. I knew you were an experienced sailing photographer, but I didn't know that part of your story. And wow, what I understand the catalyst was, your divorce and moving away and doing something different, but why do you think sailing interested you so much?
Okay, so when I was a kid, I read Arthur Ransom's Swallows and Amazons books, and they had such a massive impact on me. It was just the whole idea of kids going off and having adventures, and it was the whole sailing thing, and I just loved the idea of doing something like that. So although a barge is like totally different and sort of like much bigger than a tiny little sailing boat, it was my way of getting into that kind of world, that I'd sort of grown up with through reading books. So that was something that I just loved.
How wonderful. I think it really shows the importance, doesn't it, of almost introducing us from a young age to different things, and how whatever we maybe interacted with or read as a child can be the impact where, our interest in that when we get older. It's lovely that you were able to reconnect with that later in life. And what do you think it is about being out in landscapes and nature, particularly in terms of the photography you do now, that interests you so much?
I've always grown up with nature. So my parents were quite outdoorsy people, and Dad kind of introduced me to bird watching and wildlife and all that kind of stuff. So I've always had nature in my blood, if you like. So and I've always been quite outdoorsy. I was always encouraged to be outdoors when I was young. I was never allowed to be home during the weekend, had to be outside doing things. So it's kind of been instilled in me from like a really early age. So and now it's just become it's just a place to kind of go and relax and just connect and get away from all the sort of pressures of like modern life, I think. And that's what I love about going out with a camera, because you can really escape from everything, can't you? You can spend hours just totally engrossed in what you're doing, and that's just nice. That's kind of what I get out of it, really. But it has all been born from what's been instilled in me by my parents, I think. So and from being young.
Oh, that is so lovely. Again, it's this going back to childhood and being young. It's tying in through all of your story, which is really lovely, and you can feel the fond memories there coming up for you. You've mentioned a few times that photography has been like an escape for you throughout your life, and I this kind of marries up with what a number of people have shared with me on the podcast and my own experiences as well. So I wondered if you could maybe delve a little bit deeper into this and maybe pick out, how do you feel when you're out there immersing yourself in the landscape, and how do you feel help you escape?
Okay, so when you're out there with the camera, it's not the same as just going out for a walk, because when you walk, you look, but you don't really get involved. Whereas when you're out there with the camera, you're looking at things through your lens, and you might be looking at small details, you might be looking at plants or landscapes as a whole, but you're really sort of connecting with it. You're really immersing yourself in it. And because you're doing all that, because it's all about noticing, I think, isn't it? And because you're doing that, you just forget everything else that's going on. So by the time you've done a couple of hours of that sort of immersion, you're ready to face anything, because you've forgotten everything that was kind of going on, and you feel revitalized and re-energized, and it's just lovely. But I think photography is definitely a good way to connect with the landscape and with the natural world, because you don't get the same feelings when you're just going for a walk. You're not as immersed in it when you're just going for a walk. So it's that looking through the lens that really brings it all close to you.
Yes, and it kind of puts your life into a different perspective, doesn't it? You've mentioned getting out and that escape and being out there, but also when we look through that lens, we're getting a different perspective, and different lenses have different perspectives. And whether we're honing in on the more intricate, intimate parts of the landscape, or looking at the landscape from a wider view, which is difficult for our eyes as well, it's just giving us a perspective that as human beings we struggle to see. And then it's can also, I guess, metaphorically give us a change of perspective in our personal lives as well, which is lovely.
Yes, yeah, definitely. Yeah, I definitely think I would have been pretty lost without photography, to be honest. It really did help me through some pretty difficult times. So,
yeah. It's really nice to hear that in many ways, that you found something, that could help you through that, and that something like photography gave you that, which is beautiful. And I read on your website that photography also allows you to observe the world using all of your senses. And this is something that's really coming to me a lot now. We know that photography in most cases is a very visual form of hobby, creation, artistic pursuit, whatever you want to refer to it as. But actually, when we take in all the senses, that's when the experience is really heightened. And when we can use our sense of what we're hearing and what we're feeling and whatever, that all plays into the final image, doesn't it?
Definitely, yeah, and I think what we're feeling definitely plays into it. I think when I look back at my style of photography, I like going out in certain conditions, and I like the calm conditions, and I like quite sort of romantic. That's kind of like my style, is kind of soft, romantic, calm. And I think that's the complete opposite to what my life was at the time. And I think that's why I like this kind of soft, beautiful sort of scenes, because that wasn't how life was. So, and I think that's what comes out of you, isn't it? When you're out in the field, you sort of you react to those conditions better, so I don't perhaps react to the sort of moody sort of conditions quite so well, because I don't seek those out, because I seek the peace and the calm and the tranquility, because that's what I didn't have in my life. So definitely all that kind of stuff plays through into your photography, very much so.
That's a really beautiful way to I guess, pursue our photography, maybe to think about, what don't we have in our lives right now, and how would we like to feel? And then to go out there and create images based on the feelings that we want to feel, and connecting with the environments that really help to elicit those emotions within us, because I find if I'm in a bit of a difficult space as well, I want to go out and be by calm water. The moment there's no wind and it's a still calm day, I want to be up at a loch or by the sea or wherever it may be, and and then when we feel more excitable and things, I find that I may I don't know, again, maybe want to calm down a bit or do something more adventurous. But it's about thinking about, how do we feel in the moment? Is what we're feeling what we want to feel? And if so, how can we create images to mirror our emotions? But if it's not what we want to feel, how can we go out and seek experiences, locations, subjects that can help us to calm down and to really be present in the moment and feel those emotions? I don't know, you really made me think there, which is lovely.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think I seek out all those things, because they're things I love, and I seek out the kind of wilder side of the Suffolk coast as well, because that's what I like. I like nature. I like, the sort of natural landscape, as opposed to the more touristy seaside towns. So I'm much more drawn to the wilder coast or the rivers or that kind of thing, rather than perhaps the more iconic places that are photographed around here. I'm less interested in photographing those, and much more interested in photographing the sort of wilder places. Although obviously, if you want to make money out of your business, you have to photograph the other things as well. But they're not necessarily what I'm drawn to.
Yeah, it's getting that balance right, isn't it? And when you're maybe going out for your more personal time, with your camera, you'll seek those places that really speak to you. But if you're wanting to show off the area, then you'll of course go to more of the iconic locations. So yeah, it's interesting. We had Dan Ruffles on the podcast recently. Are you aware of Dan?
Yes, I am. Yes, yeah,
yes,
yeah. I see him sometimes out in the landscape with his camera.
how lovely. Because, of course, he loves the Suffolk coast as well, and he spoke so beautifully about it. So I wondered, from your perspective, now that you're the second person that's come on that's gone there and has just been so inspired, what does Suffolk and the coastline there, why do you find it so inspiring?
Okay, I think it's the variety that we've got here. So we've got the kind of coast, which is with its big open skies and all the things that Dan talked about, the sunrises and all that kind of stuff. And then you've got the estuaries. We've got 5 estuaries on the Suffolk coast. So we've got those sort of river scenes where you've got the mud and the salt marsh and the birds and all the different plants that you get along those quieter stretches of water. And then we're also lucky in that we've got quite a lot of heathland around here, and we've got lots of woodland around here. So we've got some really interesting old areas of woodland around here. So, and it's that variety that I like. It's and that really appeals to me. And there's and it's the wild side that I like. So, and Suffolk's got a lot of that. I mean, it's flat, so that's difficult. So, I think if you can photograph in a flat landscape, then that's you're doing okay. So flat landscapes are a bit challenging, but and they might not have the beauty of the mountains. I love coming to Scotland, but your home place definitely. Well, my home place has lots to keep me here. So.
No, I totally resonate with that. I moved back to where I was brought up earlier this year, and it's I've never been down to Suffolk myself, but what you're describing, there's definitely similarities. I mean, I'm in quite a flat part of Scotland. We can see the mountains across the sea, and we're kind of surrounded by them in the distance. But where I actually live doesn't have any mountains, but we've got beautiful ancient woodlands and the coastline and rivers and everything else apart from mountains. But strangely, mountains don't inspire me. They never have. And I think it's because they're so ecologically, there's not the wildlife and the trees and the abundance, and I love that. Whereas when I'm up a mountain, it's just, I like the vast open space, but I just don't find it excites me or inspires me as much. So I totally resonate with that. It's really good to have variety, isn't it? Because no matter how we're feeling, we've got so many choices of places to go, and we can work with the weather as well.
That's right. Yeah. So, it depends how I'm feeling on a day when I want to go up and get up and go out. And, then I'll choose when I see the weather as to what kind of location I go to, whether I go to the rivers or the woods or heaths. It's that's what I like. I like the variety. So.
Brilliant. There was something I read on your website that really resonated with me, and it said the more time we spend in an environment observing what's around, the better our images will be. And this is definitely something, like I say, I resonate with, because before I got into photography, I would just sit in my local beach and watch the light change around sunset. And it was through watching the light change and the tides being different every day and everything that I think, from a compositional light perspective, I was able to pick up that side of photography quite easily. But it took me a while to get around the technical aspects. But now I realise when I'm actually just out walking and I'm not taking any images, I actually learn more about photography than when I'm actually creating the photographs, because that observation is so important, I think. I love that you mentioned that as well.
Yeah, I really think that observation and just noticing things is so important, and that's how you connect with the landscape that you're in, by seeing what's around and observing how things sort of interact with each other. And when I come to teach people photography, or when I'm with workshop groups, there are some people that seem to do that really intuitively. Some people seem to notice things really well, and other people seem to be there and are just looking for that iconic shot, and they don't seem to do that observational. They don't seem to have the observational skills. And I think that the people that connect and sit and observe and see how the landscape works and how it all interacts with each other, they're the ones that take the better photos. So I really do think that being a good observer plays into making more interesting images. So
it is interesting. Yeah. Yeah, like I've just stopped doing my long week. I used to do landscape photography workshops on my coastline, and I've just stopped them because I'm moving into something a little bit different. But I definitely can relate to that, because I really found the participants that would come along and would really immerse themselves in the landscape, they'd come away with a number of images, and sometimes really unusual things that I would never have thought of photographing. And then you'd get an occasional person coming along that would be wandering around but not really seeing anything or connecting, and maybe really struggling with it. And it was about teaching them to try and step back and to look around them and work out what was speaking to them. But some people find that so difficult, don't they?
Yeah, they do. They really do. And but I do. So I do think that just going out for a walk, like you say, and just practicing observing what's around you, even if you took a notebook or just made notes on your phone, and just like, I'm along the river, and there's the salt marsh and the boats and the birds and trees and all that kind of thing, and what the light's doing, what the colors are doing, and all those things, because they're things that you can use in your images, but if you don't see them in the first place, you can't use them. So I really do think it is all about that, and having good observational skills is really important.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you there. What advice would you give to people? But I love that you went on to speak there about the walks, because yeah, I think it's fine to say, if somebody's listening and there may be somebody who struggles with the observational element, it's like, okay, that's me, but what can I do about it? But I love that you went along there and said, just go out for a walk and take a notebook with you, or even, sometimes I think having your camera with you, but not taking it out for the first half an hour or so, as you're walking around, and really observe what's around you and tune into it. And the more you do that, the quicker you can connect in the future, and the quicker you can almost begin in some ways, I think. But it's taken me years to get to the stage where I can connect and bring that connection together with photography. I think it's definitely a practice, but it's one that the more we do it, as you were kind of saying, the more we do it, the easier it becomes.
Yeah, I think so. I started doing what I called sketchbook photo walks, which because I love the way that artists just can go out and paint all sorts of like little bits, little scenes, and just like occupy one page of a notebook and paint all these little scenes. And I thought that would be quite relevant to photography, because you go out, you might not, you don't have to make an amazing picture every time, but if you're just kind of sketching with your camera and just catching all the little observations that you see when you're out, when you go back to that location, you can use those things again. So it's a way of just crafting images and thinking about images further down the line for when you want to come out when conditions are good, for that kind of location. But if you've been out and you've done a little sketchbook walk, and yes, all the bits that are around, then it makes composing an image when conditions are good much easier. So
that's beautiful. I've never heard of sketchbook walks before. That's so lovely. And I also think it goes back to, in some ways, what, getting to know our local areas as well, doesn't it? I mean, it's great to do a bit of traveling and see different places and photograph different scenes that may interest you. But there is something about, a lot of photographers who are very good and connected with what they do. Usually they are either in their local area or somewhere that they return to time and time again. And it takes them that time to get to know it. And, you pretty much, I think you do occasionally go elsewhere, but most of the time you photograph in your local area, don't you?
Yeah, a lot of my working time is spent in Suffolk, photographing my local area. I've done a few sort of longer projects, which I've sort of self-published as books, just sort of like exploring places that mean something to me. So one of them was just an area just down the road from me where I walked every day. This was during COVID. And I did a sort of year-long project just going there every day and recording the same sort of places, but over a year, and seeing how it changed and that kind of thing. And I think it's so valuable to go back to places again and again, because you never go and take the same photograph. Even if you took roughly the same composition, it's going to be different, because the light's going to be different, or the time of day will be different, or the season will be different. So, you'll never replicate something completely. But I just think there's real value in knowing your area really well. so that, then when you want to go out and make a portfolio image or whatever, you know where to go and what you're going to be greeted with, more or less, when you get there. So it's so yeah, when I go to Scotland, I love going to Scotland. We go quite a lot. I always feel I never make good images in Scotland. I always feel I make better images when I'm at home. And I think that is purely because I know this area much better, and I think there's a huge amount of value to that.
Yes, and it's interesting you say that because, when I was getting into photography, I would travel to the iconic places in Scotland, like Glencoe and the Isle of Skye and other places in the Highlands. And while they're beautiful, I would never come home with good images. I was always so disappointed. I've spent all this money, all this time going there specifically for photography because everybody says they're good for photography. And the best images were always taken on my local beach. And of course, I enjoyed the experience and the trip of going away and spending time with friends and family. But I most of the time I was going for photography. So I was really disappointed that I wasn't coming back with that. But I've come to realize it's because I'm just not connected to those landscapes, but I am very connected to what's close to me. And it's not just the fact that I can observe it and watch it change with the seasons. It's like I have such a connection with it because I'm there so much. And therefore, I don't know, images just come so easily to me when I'm at home. But when I'm away somewhere, it's much more of a challenge.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think when you know somewhere, you put part of yourself into those images, don't you? Because you know that place and you know what it means to you. And somehow that's what you're putting into your image. And I think that gives your image that sort of emotion and that sort of like emotive edge to it that people then connect with.
Yeah, no, I would agree. And that's one reason why I'm changing my workshops personally, because I'm going to be doing these immersive photography weekends next year, which by the time this podcast goes out, the dates will have been announced. But basically, we're in one place for 2 days rather than, going to different parts of the coast, which is what I was doing before and showing them all the main places. Now it's like we're in the same place for the whole 2 days, doing indoor and outdoor activities, but we're really getting to know the place, and it's a beautiful location with it's on a farm, but it's this beautiful wooden building, and outside you've got a pond and ancient trees and farmlands. And although it's quite a small area, there's so much to photograph. And if you're there for 2 days, seeing it in all the different, different times of day and whatnot, by the end of Sunday, you're very connected to it and the images just flow, which I think is quite exciting to be able to get people to ground, I think, somewhere, and really get to know one place rather than going all over the place. But I mean, everybody wants something different, don't they?
Yes, they do. Yeah. So, yeah, very much so. But I think that sounds lovely. What you're planning on doing. That I think that sounds really nice. It's I think some people find that quite difficult, don't they? The idea that they've got to spend 2 days in one place. But I actually think, like you say, there's so much, when you've got so much variety, there's so much that you can point your camera at, and just looking at smaller scenes as well. So, yeah, I think that'd be good.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to do more mindfulness stuff as well. It's like you really need to, I think, really be in one place and look more deeply at what's around you. But yeah, I mean, it's just trying to offer something a bit different. That's kind of where I'm going right now. But no, it's exciting. I'm really looking forward to it. And I guess, where did your journey in starting workshops first begin?
I suppose I've been doing them for about 4 years now, but it took me a long time to kind of pluck up the courage to do it because I didn't think I'd be very good at it, and everyone kept telling me I needed to do it, and I wasn't very comfortable with that idea. But yeah, I suppose it's just I like showing people places that I love. So, once I felt that I really knew some of the places on the Suffolk coast, and I like to try and take people to places that are perhaps a little bit different to where normal workshops go. So I try and find some of the quieter sort of locations and locations that perhaps people might not have seen photographed before, so that they're presented with something that they haven't seen before. So then they've got no preconceptions. So then it's perhaps easier for them to sort of see where to make their images. I just love I love running workshops. I love the fact that everyone sees the world in such different ways, and I love because I learn as much from the people that I take out on a workshop as they probably learn from me, because I just love seeing how they interpret a landscape. So it might be a landscape that I've photographed hundreds of times before, but they'll come up with something different, and I think that's wonderful. So it's that's I like that. I think that's so valuable, because we can all learn from each other.
Yeah, it's exciting, isn't it? I mean, I found that as well. We can go out and do our own practice a lot, but when we're actually out on a workshop, whether we're hosting it or taking part in it, we learn so much. And like I say, as the host, it's incredible what you can learn from your clients. It's amazing. And, it's like this two-way relationship, isn't it? You take them somewhere and show them around and maybe initiate ideas or exercises or whatever for them. And then when you see their final images, it's like, oh my gosh, wow. And then you start seeing places different or seeing techniques different. And especially if you end up in a group or something, it just sort of magnifies that. So do you do
because you all
one-to-ones
bounce ideas off each other, don't you? So and I think that's really nice. Yeah. So
yeah, definitely. Is it one-to-one workshops you do, or is it group workshops?
So I do one-to-one and group workshops. Yeah. So which is nice. And I've started doing Zoom sessions after the workshops too, because I found that people wanted to see everybody else's images. So that was a nice way to kind of all talk about our images afterwards, which I think people find really useful, actually. So it's, so we talk about post-processing and all that kind of stuff, but it's just seeing everybody else's images. I think there's a value to that, where everybody can see what everyone else has taken, because you learn just as much from that, I think, because we've all been to the same place. Everybody comes away with something different, and it's just how they interpret that.
Yeah. That's a really good idea, that, because I've always thought, like, people always want to share their images afterwards, and I've done like groups where you can all put your images in, but I almost don't know if anyone actually goes and looks at them. Whereas if you've actually got this scheduled meeting and you're actually all discussing the images and showing the images you've created, that's a beautiful way to help to almost complete the learning, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And I think everybody gets something out of it. And it's nice to see each other again, because you go on a day's workshop and you kind of come away as friends, don't you? And then it's lovely for everyone to kind of catch up again, sort of like a week or 2 weeks later, and just have a look at everyone's images. I think there's a real value to that. So, it's been quite popular. So.
Yeah, brilliant, fantastic. One thing you'd mentioned earlier was books. You mentioned you'd created sometimes go away and create these books, and the one that you made throughout the pandemic. And I noticed on your website that you've got a number of different books that you've created in recent times. And yeah, I just wondered where your love for creating photo books and sharing them with the world came from.
I don't know, really. I suppose the projects that I started off were. So the first books were small books, and they were basically just about Suffolk. So some of them were like photo locations, and I did a photo walking book as well. So that was quite popular. And that was just a way to get people out and about. And then the other projects that I did, one was about my local area here, and one was about an ancient woodland that I've been photographing for a few years now, and just how that has sort of changed and evolved and all that kind of stuff. So, and I just like sharing that kind of stuff with people. I think photos are nice printed, and a book is a great way to share what you've done. And I also like a bit of writing as well. So, and I think writing and photography complement each other really nicely. So that's another way that I can sort of share my thoughts about a particular place. But one of the book projects that I did last year was about getting other people involved. So I became basically a sort of editor. I did do my own bits, but I wanted to see how other people reacted to the Suffolk coast. So I got people to tell their own stories about the places that I like to go and photograph, and I put together a little book about that. So that was really nice to see how other people, react to the places that I enjoy visiting and photographing. So that was a nice little project to put together, because that everyone has different stories about places. Places mean different things to different people. And I just love all that. I'm quite nosy, really.
No, it's lovely though, because like you said, it goes back to that sharing with other people, isn't it? You're sharing your beautiful area with people, and then you're getting to hear back from people who have connected with your area as well, and really see what it means to them, because everyone's got their own story and connection to a place. So that sounds beautiful. Right. I love that.
I think we're so sort of unconnected with the natural world, aren't we, in this day and age? We're a bit nature depleted in this country, and we're a bit not as connected as we could be, and trying to get people to come out and spend some time in an area and then perhaps tell their story, that's helping them to connect, isn't it, I think? And the more people kind of connect, then the more we care about the place that we live in, and I think that's a good thing. So
yeah, definitely. And so, yeah, for anyone that's interested in making a book, and I guess I come into this as well, I've got so many book ideas and I just need to really sit down and actually start putting them into place, both photo books, but also written books as well, and books combining them. Yeah, there's so many different ways to do it, isn't there? So do you create yours and then get physical products, then people buy them, or how do you actually go about doing that process?
Yeah, I've done it all myself. So I use a package called InDesign, and I sort of plan my project, and obviously collect all the photos, collate them all together, and then so it's all the sequencing and the layouts, and I do all that, and then I've self-published every time that I've done it. So it's always been a bit of you're taking a bit of a gamble, aren't you? In that, you have to print a few to make it worthwhile. But yeah. So, but it's such a fun process. It's such an interesting process. I love all that. So, I mean, years ago, I used to work in a drawing office. So that's kind of, I like that sort of technical side to it, and like the, how things look and the creative side of laying things out. So I guess the kind of book thing kind of fits back in with that nicely. So it's just something that I really like doing.
Oh, that's so lovely. And it must be so exciting when you get orders coming in and then you've got to package everything up and ship it all out.
Yeah, it's really nice. It's lovely to know that people want to buy things that you've produced.
Oh, it's so lovely. So lovely. And you'd mentioned a bit there when we were speaking about connecting, you'd mentioned about having this connection and understanding to the landscape. And I know that you like to refer to yourself as a creative conservationalist. And I know connecting with the landscape is very important to you. So I wondered, of course, photography connects you with this, but to end today, I wondered if you could go in a little bit about your interest in conserving the environment.
I've always loved nature, and I've kind of grown up in East Anglia, so I grew up in Essex really, and I've been around this area for a long time, and I've seen so many changes, and like my dad took me bird watching when I was 8 years old, and the number of birds that we used to see then compared to the number of birds that I would see now when I go bird watching, there's no comparison. It's just, we are sort of so nature depleted, and I don't want to lose what we still have. And I think, with my photography, I want to try and make people aware of what's out there, and the beauty of what's out there, and how fragile it is, and how we need to look after it. But I don't really know how to sort of do that. But I thought, if I can produce nice images and put together books that show an area, and then maybe people will want to come and explore that area for themselves. And then maybe they'll start to connect, and then they'll start to care. And then that produces a sort of snowball effect, doesn't it? And then hopefully we'll start to look after the areas that we've got left. So I guess it goes back to childhood again, doesn't it? It goes back to, where you grew up, and how you were sort of brought up, if you like. But, so I've just loved nature since I was a kid. So
Yeah, and that's the thing. We can't understand or care about something if we don't spend time in it. So I think even just being nature landscape photographers, going out there with our cameras and photographing it and then sharing that with others, whether it's posting our images online, creating books, doing workshops like we've all experienced here. When people are then engaging with your work or coming along to these things, then they're inspired to either get out themselves and connect, or they're connecting when they're with you on the workshops, and even that has a ripple effect. I think a lot of us want to have these messages in our photography, don't we, and raise awareness to things, but actually just simply by us doing what we love and sharing that with the world is then having a ripple effect on other people, and they're being inspired to get out to connect, and then they fall in love with nature, and suddenly it's I think that's the biggest thing we can do, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so, and that's kind of what I try to do with my photography, I think. So yeah, that's my motivation behind it, I think, really.
Brilliant. Yeah, fantastic. Well, Gill, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you today. I've loved listening to your story and everything that you do with your work, and also how photography has helped you to be how photography has helped to be an escape for you through some of your difficult periods in life. So yeah, I hope it's been of great interest to many of the listeners as well. I'm pretty certain it will have been. And for anyone who's really resonated with you today and would like to connect with you further, or maybe even come on a workshop or purchase one of your books, where can they go to connect with you?
I think the best place to find me is my website, which is gillmoon.com. I'm also on Instagram at Gill Moon Photography. So that's it, I think. It's been lovely to talk with you today, Kim. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. And I'll put a link to what you've just mentioned in the show notes below so people can get direct access. But yeah, thank you once again, Gill. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you very much, Kim. Thanks.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this week's podcast. It really does mean the world to me. If you'd like to get further involved with Photographic Connections, including joining our worldwide supportive online community or coming to Scotland to one of our in-person immersive photography weekends, you can find all the details at photographicconnections.com. And now that this podcast has come to an end, there's only one thing left for you to do. It's time to pick up your camera and head outdoors. There's so many incredible photographic opportunities just waiting for you to discover.